Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing super duper well today. So today we have Feras Musmar as our instructor. He's going to be talking about live service games. Firas is an experienced product and game design director with over 15 years of experience in both gaming and the financial service industries. His focus has been on engagement design and live services, and he's worked on over 10 titles with, going from freemium models to AAA titles and stuff. And he's worked for companies such as DICE, EA, and GameLoft. So, Firas, the floor is yours. We're going to be talking about live engagement services, and enjoy.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for the introduction. So first, I'm going to share my screen because that's what people usually do over Zoom. Here we go. Then I'm going to ask the standard question. Can you see my screen? Usually people nod if this has worked. Sweet. Okay, everything's going according to plan. So yeah, thank you so much, Ashraf, for the introduction, and thanks for having me here. Very excited to chat with you all. So I think Ashraf covered the introduction quite well, so I'm not going to dive a bit deeper into my journey, but just to go over quickly. So I was born in Jordan, and I split my childhood between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. My dad was working in Saudi, I was living in Jordan, and you know the standard stuff, keep traveling back and forth. And that was usually before starting to work in games is usually the era where you play the most amount of games, unfortunately, because as you start working in the industry, you get too busy for playing a lot of games. But I still play quite a bit. But that era is actually my golden period of playing games. I played a huge amount of games on the PSX, and I think I still remember our days in the internet cafes playing a lot of Dota, Battlefield, Vietnam, and that sort of games. In 2005, started working in Jordan. My friend started a studio called Nassen's Entertainment Studios. And like any first gaming experience, usually you have a lot of excitement and energy, but not a lot of knowledge. So I learned so much during that job, and it got me really excited for working in games. We worked on AA games mainly back then. In 2009, the studio unfortunately shut down, and back then the Middle East wasn't really filled with gaming companies. And I had my bachelor in finance, so I got into the financial industry. I worked in investment banking and financial consulting, private equity, public equity valuation. It was really fun, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. There was always a calling for working in video games. So 2013, GameLoft had a job in New Zealand that was looking for something called the game economy designer, which is back then was somewhat new. They wanted someone who has experience in business and experience in game design. And I thought, well, maybe with my experience, they'll be keen on shipping someone all the way over from Jordan to New Zealand. And it worked. So I moved over there. I lived for 5 years, worked on freemium mobile games such as My Little Pony, Ice Age Adventures, The Amazing Spider-Man, and a bunch of other Monster Collection games. We were mainly making premium mobile games in Gameloft and Outrix. In 2018, I moved over to Stockholm to work with DICE and EA. They've just launched Star Wars Battlefront 2, so I worked on that for a bit. And then I became the engagement design director for the Battlefield franchise. I worked on Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 2042, and shipped multiple AAA games with DICE and EA. And recently, just 2 months ago, a bunch of ex-DICE and EA developers started a new studio in Stockholm called TTG Games. So I moved with them. So I'm back in a startup world again after 5 years of AAA development. So now you know like who's the floating head that's talking to you today. I can jump into what we'll cover today. So what I was thinking is we'll start with just a general live service games brief, like talk about the landscape, the size of live service games these days, then jump into the key focus areas, usually what live service developers or live ops managers would look at while they're working on a live service game. And then from there, we go into what I call the core engagement system design principles and give some examples of what we use in engagement design. And then some considerations and summary. And then we go into the Q&A. I think the first 4 points will take maybe 50 minutes, so we have plenty of time for the Q&A. You never know, sometimes the Q&A lasts 5 minutes, 30 minutes, depends on how interesting the topic is, but I just made sure that we have enough space in the end for us to chat if anyone has more questions. Cool. So with that, let's start. Let's start looking at the landscape. So the best way to start any presentation about games is usually to have a wall of text with a table filled with game names, because I'm sure that is very easy to read. But basically what we're looking at is these are the top 10 games on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox by average MAU, which is monthly active users during the year 2022. So these are the games that were basically had the most amount of users on these platforms. When you look at these 10 games, even though they come from multiple genres, you can easily see the Battle Royale is standing out of these genres, but there's other like representation of different genres on this list. All of them, with no exception, are live service games. They come from different business models. Some of them are free to play, some of them are premium. We'll talk about that a little bit down the line. But the idea that I'm trying to get across here is the number of users that play live service game is unparalleled. They attract the most amount of users. They tend to stay in the games for a very, very long time. There's even a snippet here from a user that's basically saying that in this top 10 list, only Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 was the new game that was released in that year. So even older games still attract a lot of monthly active users. And that's actually one of the powers of having a live service game and building and iterating on it. Second thing is, it's not only there's a huge number of users that are playing live service games, they're also very profitable. So in terms of revenue, they're taking a sizable chunk of the market, and they're not slowing down. They're expected to grow further and further. Like the graph we hear is from President's research. There's other numbers from other sources, but it seems like research in general and the data is showing that the growth is not slowing down. It's going to keep going further and further as these like a huge number of players are also resulting in good revenues. So live service games are extremely profitable as well. When it comes to the different gaming segments and the genres, now there are entire genres that are purely live service games. It's very rare to come across PvP games, for example, that aren't live service, as in the nature of the game now and the game design has evolved to naturally incorporate live service mechanics for multiple reasons for PvP games, because you need a bigger user base, you need matchmaking queues, but also because these games usually involve interest in the players growing their skills and etc. There's other genres that are also now primarily live service games, like the MMOs genre. It's very hard to launch an MMO and not expected to have a detailed live service with it. The majority of mobile games are live service games. And then on top of that as well, some IPs that were predominantly in the past single player or offline focused are now have expanded into the live service area with varied degrees of success. Like if you look at Final Fantasy 14, it's currently considered one of the best MMOs ever, coming from an IP that was predominantly single player. And Grand Theft Auto Online has achieved Rockstar a huge amount of success and revenues, even though Grand Theft Auto originally was built as a single player game. It evolved into something way bigger than Rockstar anticipated. And now we even see games like The Last of Us, which was mainly focused on immersive storytelling, experimenting with the MP live service games, and they're working on a game called The Last of Us Faction. So even historically single player IPs are now evolving and going into the live service sphere due to the sheer number of players that are interested in those experiences. So with taking all that in consideration, if you're going to be a professional game developer, there's a very, very good chance you're going to end up working on a live service game. On the plus side, there's a lot of advantages for working on live games. It's something that I've actually, throughout my career, ended up enjoying it a bit more. That sometimes I even struggle thinking about working on a non-live service game. Maybe one day I'll end up doing it, but for now I'm enjoying it so much. So let's start talking about like the advantages of having a game that is a live service. So the most important thing that I really find interesting is the amount of data you get from having the game live and in the hands of the players. So while you're working and developing a game, you can do a lot of UX/R tests, you can do a lot of mock reviews, you can do a lot of internal play tests, but at the end of the day, you don't necessarily know to the full extent how the players are going to react to your game or your design, even with the amount of different tests you have, all the focus groups testing you do. at the end of the day, the player's data speaks volumes, because sometimes even the player behavior will show something that is very different than what you intended for the feature, or also very different than what the players have been vocal about. So sometimes the player spend a lot of the time talking about a specific feature, but when you look at the data, they're actually engaging and they're using a different feature. And even more importantly, sometimes they engage in something that you thought wasn't going to be as important, but you discover once the game is live that the majority of your players are spending their time there. So working on a live game gives you that option to look at the data, take that in, improve your designs, make them better, perfect your product further. Then you release the game out there, and then you measure, did your change make your players happy or not? Did it have a positive impact on the game? It's also, you carry all these learnings with you when you start working on different games, especially if you stay within the same genre. Once you're working on multiple games, same genre, you take a lot of these learnings from the different player behavior, the different mistakes that you've made in the past, the different experiments, and you carry this forward into making better games in the future. There's examples of games that were they were released and they didn't get good public reception. I use like Rainbow Six Siege as an example. It's considered one of the best shooters of all time. It's very successful at the moment, but at launch it wasn't doing so great. And then the development team decided to take in all the feedback from the player, all the data, iterate on it further, on and on and on, until like the game now is enjoying a very successful amount of players. The graph stops at 2018 here, but the game is still quite active and live to this day even. So that is the power of iterative design, where you actually have a solid foundation that you can build upon more and more and grow your community by improving your game further and further. And this is something you can usually get by only working on a live game. The other part that's really interesting is that live service games are long lasting. So I used to be a Dota 2 player and invested so much time in it. And then I remember the amount of stories we had. So when I used to meet my friends in real life and talk about Dota and the things that happened in it, or you can, some of my friends actually met online from multiple countries in World of Warcraft, and then they ended up meeting each other in real life and shared a lot of stories that happening. So having games that are long lasting like that allows your community to grow further, for them to have memorable stories and memorable like moments that they will remember as a part of their life. And you being able to see all of this is really rewarding for you as a developer, because you're seeing the amount of things you can do for the players in your game based on all the knowledge, all the feedback you're getting from them, and making your game better over time instead of abandoning it at some point. And at the same time, it's very rewarding for the players, because even if they stop, like I stopped playing Dota 2 at some point, I still have very positive memories of it. And I still have friends that I talk to, even though all of us don't play Dota anymore. So all of I'm saying is live service game creates the amount of time and the duration to create memorable experiences that the players will remember for a long time, but also some of them create the opportunities as well to create real life connections. Having said that, not everything is positive, obviously. So there are some challenges in working on live service games. It's not always easy to work on. It's actually part of the excitement is the challenges you face. So there's this biggest challenge is usually called the content treadmill. And it's called that because you feel like you're on a treadmill running in your own place, because you're trying to produce enough content to keep the players excited about the game. So if you remember, as I mentioned at the beginning, live service games are bigger than ever. There's a huge amount of players in them. There's a lot of revenues, which also means there's a lot of competition there as well. So for you to stand out between the other games and keep the players' interest, you need to make sure that you have a solid roadmap for your live service starting from day one. I'm using Overwatch 2 as an example. Like, they already have a clear roadmap of what we're doing around release. You can see the amount of content they're producing, but at the same time, the amount of fixes they're thinking about, the new modes, all the direction they're taking the game towards. So it's very a demanding thing for you, because already you've launched the game, which is very a difficult thing to do, but then also from day one, your work starts to work on this roadmap and keep the game interesting and exciting for players all the time. Going back into the theme of competition, now there's more and more live service games than ever, which means the players have a lot of options to choose from. And at the same time, there's multiple business model, like calling out free to play, for example. The players can switch between those multiple games without any actual cost for them. So that means you are not in a bubble when you're releasing a live service game. You're thinking of, okay, who are these players are going to play my game? Are they going to come from a different experience? Are they going to be entirely new for this genre? What is the space that I'm trying to find in this live service game? Because as a core aspect that I mentioned, usually players stay in a live service game for a long time. They stay for a long time, which means there's more and more games being added to that sphere. So there's a fierce competition in some genres of live service games. The third one is when you release a game, it's really great that you are building on it and you're iterating on it and improving it. But usually the foundation that you had at launch is something you will carry with you for a long time. So sometimes I've talked to friends that worked on games that lasted more than 10 years, and they have now in their game code that has been there for 10 years, or things they can't really adjust so much because there's this solid foundation that they can't move away from. So you can always improve your product to some degree, but it's also usually it's getting bigger and more complex as you go. And sometimes you need to refactor your designs in a way. So you need to double check which areas of the game are still relevant for you, which areas are relevant for the players, which are the stuff that you can move around. But also you need to accept that part of working on a live game is there are some things that you just cannot change because otherwise it will be really costly. It will change the heart of the experience. There's multiple reasons you can dive into. So a lot of people consider this a bit of a challenge. I sometimes find this also to be a bit of an advantage because if you have a core that is working really well and you're building upon it, it's kind of easier to focus on the things you need to fix. Like, you know that the core is working and it's really solid. Maybe you don't need to mess with that so much as add to it and enhance it, which is something that gets a bit challenging if you're building a game that hasn't been released yet and someone comes up with ideas that are very convincing, but they change the core experience because you don't have that foundation up there. You're not stuck with it. Internal development can sometimes pivot, while in a live service game, there's like some facts as an X cannot change. Let's build around it to some degree. So a bit of an advantage, but it's definitely a challenge. And then the last one is the thing that I was mentioning. There's a big competition. There's expectations of content. There is a core for the game that you're building upon that you can't necessarily change. But the market around you is changing all the time as well. So let's take an example when you look at how like battle passes became super popular in the gaming industry. I think that was around, let's say when Fortnite made it very popular around 8 years ago or so. There were other live games that did not have battle passes in them. And then the battle pass became a very popular way of engaging players. It became a trend. So these games had to make a decision. Should we follow this trend? Should we take the battle pass, adapt it to what we have? Should we find a new way that's even better to engage with players than battle passes? But none of these games had the choice to just stand still. You need to always figure out ways to keep the game refreshing and interesting for the players, either adding additional like engagement systems or keeping up with the trends that are changing around you. So with that, we looked at the landscape. We can now look at the 3 key focus areas for live service op. This is what you're most probably going to hear a lot of game developers talk about when they're working on live service game. The 3 are acquisition, retention, and investment, also known as monetization. So for today, I think I'm just going to cover the 3 of them really quickly. We talk about them briefly. But I would like us to focus mainly on retention in our chat today, because I feel like as game developers, we tend to impact that quite a bit. And I have like multiple reasons for that. I'll explain that when we talk about retention. But let's start with defining those 3 things. So acquisition is basically how do you think about getting new players into your game. There's obviously multiple ways of doing that. There's paid ways. So you have ads, Facebook ads, YouTube ads, even billboards in the street. Any paid way of getting users into the game can fall under that category. And then you have organic or unpaid, which is viral, social, etc. usually, like, especially if you're working on a big like AAA production, the marketing team is going to be really focused on the acquisition part more than the game dev team. So you don't necessarily always have to worry about it depending on the studio size and the game size that you're working on. But there's elements of viral design you can always keep in your mind while you're building your product. This could range from, are your designs friendly enough for players to watch them and understand them? Are, let's say, for example, are they streamer friendly? Do you have streamer tools in the game? Or are you designing something that you know by default will be so interesting, or you have an event in the game that's going to be so interesting that the media will pick it up and talk about it and drive that organic traffic into your game? So as a game designer slash developer, you could really impact your acquisition funnel, but usually in a big project, this gets taken care of by mainly the marketing team, and they work with you hand in hand into improving your designs to have a healthy acquisition funnel. Second part is retention, and I think this is the most important one. It's basically, how do you keep players in your game? How do you get the players to stay in the game? One key challenge that I noticed a lot of developers talk when it comes to them talking about retention is that they use the word as an absolute term, like I'm saying, like this game has bad retention, or this game that we're working on has a retention problem. The challenge that I see here is retention is such a big term. So in a way for it to be actually actionable and for you to work on it properly and think about it properly, you should break it into segments. The simplest way is to think short-term retention, medium-term, and long-term. And this way you design systems that answer to those different motivations. Or you ask yourself a question in terms of like, okay, I feel like I have enough retention systems for early, mid experience, but my game doesn't have an end game. What is the retention mechanics for the end game, or the after the player has spent a month in the game, whatever like metric you want to use? I think usually it's very more useful if you break retention into different segments and try to tackle it down instead of tackling the absolute retention, which is just a big word. When it comes to engagement design, it's usually is the thing that has the most impact on retention. You as a developer can also impact this so much in terms of how you can make your game sticky, how you can make it understandable, which systems you have, what are the type of things you encourage the players to do in the game. So I'll dive a bit more into that when we get to the engagement design section. But out of the three, engagement design can have the most impact on retention, more than acquisition and investment. Comes to investment / monetization, it's the question of how do you make money out of your game? So obviously, there's no shortage of business models in video games. There's paid and even paid games from multiple price points, $5, $10, $20, $40, $60. There's paid games, but they also sell you DLC packs. There's free to play that's becoming very popular. There's free to enter is making a bit of a comeback. So you enter the game for free, and then you can purchase the rest of the experience as X amount of time, or you can buy a product that's attached to it. I think an example would be what Call of Duty is doing these days with Warzone. So Warzone is free. You can enter the game and play Warzone for free, but if you want to play Call of Duty multiplayer, you will have to purchase the full product. That's an example of something that you can consider free to enter, or free to play is in between these days. And there's obviously in-game purchases, also known as microtransactions. These aren't mutually exclusive to each other as well. So there are games that are paid that have in-game purchases. There are games that are paid that have DLC in them and they have in-game purchases. There are games that paid with DLC and don't have microtransactions. So there's multiple ways you can mix these with varied success. Something that I just wanted to really note is live service games, as we saw in the graph at the beginning, tend to really favor free-to-play, because if it works, you get a huge amount of users into the game. But I don't believe it's the only viable model. There's like a lot of successes from all of these models. So it's always something to take into consideration. What is the thing that works really well for your game, the genre you're working on, the different market competitors? Like this is usually a very big decision. There's books about investment and monetization. We can spend the whole talk about it. So I'm not going to dive so much deep into it today as much as retention, which gets me to my point. Why did I pick retention today out of investment and acquisition? So one key reason is that without retention, the other two don't really matter so much in a live service game. Like if you are acquiring a lot of users into the game and they're dropping out, then they're not investing in your game. The second thing is if you don't retain the players into your live service, over time, the live service would die out when you stop having enough players in the game or your acquisition funnel goes down. And the third part is I feel like as game developers, we should incorporate retention more and retention mechanics, game design into our core loop a bit more and focus on it, tackle it a bit early instead of building the core loop, building the core experience, and then adding these mechanics later on, which I've seen a lot of studios struggle with pulling this off correctly. So in my opinion, if you don't have your retention solid in your live service experience, the other two aren't really going to work out for you. And the second reason that I thought I should focus on retention is I didn't know the people that are going to attend today. So maybe some of you aren't thinking about working on live service games. Maybe some of you aren't interested in them. The idea is the concepts that I'll be talking about when it comes to engagement design, we can also use them in offline, single player, non-live service games. I actually feel they're underutilized. So like if you look at the code that I have here, you can see that the majority of the players that purchase single player experiences, they just don't finish them. Even sometimes it's like, I'm using here the example of Noah 2, the number of completions is around 17%. There's very few games that report high completion rates. And I think one of the reasons, there's multiple reasons, obviously. There's nothing simple and straightforward in game development, but one of the reasons is engagement mechanics, progression mechanics, that sort of stuff. They're usually underfunded in making those games, and they're also aren't tied in with the core loop. So if you're working on a non-live service game, some of these concepts might be useful for you. If you incorporate them, maybe the players that play your game will end up playing it a bit longer. They'll see more of the experience you're trying to provide for it. Maybe it will encourage them to finish it. So that was one of the reasons I thought we'd focus more a bit on retention as well. So with that in mind, let's jump into the engagement design section of our talk today. So we'll start with the easy stuff. What is engagement design and who are engagement designer? So the term engagement is a bit interesting because I think it mainly came from marketing using the word to engage with their users, and then it got applied to engage with design. It's a very, very broad word that basically means it's the different design systems that you're using to, as the word says, engage with your audiences or let them engage with the game. It ranges over from progression systems, missions, seasonal events, seasonal resetting systems. It's a very, very broad stroke. Sometimes it's called the meta outer layer of the game. There's multiple ways to describe it. And the same thing comes to the job titles for engagement designers. So economy designers are usually part of engagement design team, the system designers, quest designers, mission designers. Sometimes you find even narrative designers as part of the engagement design. So basically, it's not like one specific job title. It's an area that incorporates a lot of people from multiple crafts. Based on the studio size, it could be called different things. It could be called the progression design team. It could be called the missions team, social team, or just engagement that incorporates all of these people. So basically, it's a big umbrella for the meta section of the game. So when it comes to the key concepts that I want to talk about, I'm going to cover three things. I'm going to talk about growth and progress, then what I call key return triggers, and then eventually talk a little bit about time-limited content, because that's very popular now. Live services would be weird not to discuss it. So let's start with growth and progress. So since we're all, I'm imagining, gamers into this room, we're very familiar with progression. There are several types of it. So just to try to simplify it, I broke it into three different areas. There's the skill-focused progression. So if you're really into a chess, for example, you play a lot of chess, you're trying to get better at the game, you're improving a skill. Your key focus for progressing is how your skill is measured in chess, or maybe CSGO or other like ranked focused, skill-focused games. There's power progression, which is also historically, I think, was called RPG progression. So you kill things, you get XP, you level up, you become stronger. or you grab a weapon and you start using that weapon over and over again, and that weapon becomes stronger over time. The definition of power progression is you're becoming more powerful as you're progressing through whatever progression curve or system you're going through. And then the third part is horizontal progression. And I guess from the term, you can see this doesn't mean you're becoming more powerful. It means you have now more options that are on the same level of power. This sort of progression is more popular when it comes to PvP games, because you're trying to avoid making the power curve unbalanced between new players and players who have been in the game for a long time and unlocked everything. It would feel bad if you get killed by a weapon in a PvP game that you don't have access to, and you need to progress to have it. So usually end up with having what we call horizontal progression, which is as you're progressing through the game, you're unlocking more options instead of unlocking pure power. Obviously, as I said, there's like way more details that you can dive into different progression types, but these are like the three main categories we're looking at. In all of these systems, the way to measure if you've designed a successful progression system or a growth system is if it answers those three questions to the player. So if the player is asking themselves, where am I now, where I want to be, and what will I get when I'm done, then you have designed a system that is very engaging for the players. Because I think to some degree, even like real life, this is a question I hope we ask ourselves often, and then we see like where we want to go. And imagine how easier things would be if you have actually clear guides for you or clear hints for you in games that answer these questions for you as you're progressing. In the minute that the player aren't able to answer any of those, so they don't have a clear goal, they don't have a way to measure it, they don't see the reward of doing it, you're risking that at this point the player is going to give up on your game or your experience because they're not seeing really the value of pursuing this further. So to elaborate on this a bit more, I'm going to do a very, very, very simple example. So let's say we have a game, and in this game, you're a level 1 knight, you start as level 1 knight, and your goal is to defeat a level 50 dragon. That's the end goal. You go and try to fight the dragon. Obviously, it's 50 levels higher than you, so there's no chance of you beating them. So what do you do now as a player? If we're going back to that system we talked about, what we can do is we can give the players some quests. So we can tell them like, hey, if you get a shield, you kill 3 enemies, you gather 5 chicken buckets, you will be able to level up and become stronger. And as the players are completing those quests, you can see that measurable progress on their XP bar. And then now they level up, they get some sort of reward, maybe a new weapon, whatever it is. And then now they get up to level 100 if they keep repeating this and the reward, the cycle is interesting enough. And then they can go and defeat the level 50 dragon. Cool, very simple. So why did we do all of this? First, we created smaller goals that are feeding into the main goal, right? Because we did design something where the player has those 3 questions answered, right? We told them you can go kill the dragon. You're level 1, you need to be level 50 at least, and you'll get the reward, which is, I guess, winning the game. But because the goal is so big, we needed to create multiple smaller goals for the players to answer that question as they're going through the experience, right? Because sometimes if the goal is so far, you might even forget your end goal or what reward you're getting from it. The second thing we did is we created constant and immediate positive feedback for their actions. So the game is constantly telling the player, good job, you're getting to the point that you want. Keep doing this thing, don't keep doing that thing. And this naturally teaches the players the behavior that helps them achieve that goal and progress the game further. The reward helps them to stay longer into the game as well. And then having the measurable progress and the clear milestones help with that so much. So at any point, the player wants to just focus on playing the game. They not want to focus on the progression so much. It's on the side, encouraging them in a very, very subtle way. All of this creates a very good sense of flow for the players. It will usually encourage them to engage with the experience further, complete your game and spend more time in it, see the different experiences that you worked hard to provide for them to see and enjoy. If we take these things and the questions I mentioned in the past and look at like a battle pass system, it is a lot like the dragon example. So usually the way that battle pass works in games is every season you have a new seasonal progression. Usually you start from rank 1 to rank 100 on the battle pass. So your tier 100, the reward you want to get from there is your dragon. But then it's segmented into smaller rewards along the way. Every time you're working towards that tier 100 you're trying to achieve, the game is reminding you that you're doing all right. It's giving you rewards along the way to keep the journey more interesting for you, while the end goal is always there. And it's because the duration of engagement is very long here. Usually battle passes, it depends on the game, 3, 6, 12, sometimes 9 weeks, the duration. You need to make sure that the journey over the 8 or 12 or 9 weeks is interesting enough. So they incorporate them with smaller, let's say, weekly missions that feed into the battle pass or some sort of reward systems. Again, going back to the examples that and the questions that I mentioned previously. So this is what a battle pass is at the end of the day. It's a progression system that's trying to help the players answer those 3 questions. Second part I want to talk about is key return triggers. These are very popular in engagement design. I think they usually fall very close to progression, if not like straight after it. So what are they? I think the best way to define them would be, there are reasons for you to think about returning back to a game. It's positive experiences usually that gets you excited about going back into a game or a positive experience you've been enjoying. They range from streaking systems. So I guess everyone's familiar with daily login rewards. It's the easiest example of a streaking system. It's a way to encourage the players to return back into the game, start their session on a high note. You give them a reward as soon as they walk in, so they're excited, but then also they're excited about launching the game where they're not in it, so they can get those rewards. There are multiple streaking systems you can achieve, but daily login rewards are the most popular one. Also, they're a bit tricky. If there's a big punishment for breaking a streaking system, it can usually result into a negative reactions from the player. So it's like if you're working, I don't know, I had this problem, for example, in Duolingo. So when I was learning Swedish on Duolingo, I had a streak of 60 days and I was really happy. And then I lost the streak and now I'm less encouraged to go back because I'm starting from scratch again. And then obviously some games now, and even Duolingo, like give you ways to restore your streak and that sort of stuff. But my point is, streaking systems can be double-edged, but they're also, if they're utilized properly, you start the game with a usually positive experience. It's a return trigger for players. The other thing that's very, very popular is rotation systems. These can cover like a lot of things, but I'm going to talk about maybe the missions one and the store one. So missions usually, when they rotate, like daily missions or weekly missions, they provide this very interesting behavior in the players. So let's say you have a set of daily missions and those daily missions give you XP, like the Fortnite example we're looking at. Once you start your daily session, you're getting a big boost of XP at the beginning of it and a big boost of progression that, let's say, slows down the second hour if you've already finished your daily missions. This way, when the next day they reset, when you go back into the game again, you're feeling a bit excited because you're getting that boost of progression again. So it makes your entry back into the game a bit smooth and exciting and rewarding for you as a player. And the same thing goes with the weekly missions and multiple mission system. That's not the only focus of them, but that's one of the things that they provide for players by them rotating. This also applies to, again, in Fortnite, they have a rotating store. So they have a set of cosmetics and player expression items that the players have really engaged a lot in Fortnite. And having those rotate in the store gets the players to go back into the game and check, well, what's going on? What is new in the store? But this also ranges into like sometimes games have limited game modes. Sometimes they have rotation for game modes, rotation for different content in the game. The idea is a rotation system gets the players to get excited about launching the game. And it's a key trigger for them to launch the game again to see like what's new, what's happening there. And then last one is the timer systems. These are very dominant in the mobile space, not as much in I think AAA, maybe some free-to-play PC titles have them. But at the end of the day, you can use them for multiple reasons. A lot of mobile games use them as a conversion mechanic, but they're also useful as a soft gating mechanic. So it's a way for you sometimes to signal to the player, maybe now is a good time for you to end your session, and then you can come back again tomorrow and you'll start with a fresh start. Sometimes it's soft gating mechanism, sometimes it's pure monetization, sometimes it's just to get the players to go back into the game the next day. You can utilize them. With timer systems, I would always say, just be wary. There's which genre you're working on, which platform you're releasing on. It can decide which sort of timer systems you could or should not have in the game. Then the last bit is the time-limited content, and I'll talk a little bit about seasonality and how time-limited content is very popular now in live service games. So seasonal resets is now super popular in live service games. We're here looking at like Call of Duty. And one thing that they actually like to do that's seemingly very successful for them is they package each season. They like to start the season on a big high note. So there's a trailer going on. They're marketing all the content you'll be getting throughout that season, but they don't necessarily also drop it all in one go, because all live service games have this curve where you have a big start, the number of players that join you at the beginning of the season, and then it starts to dwindle down. So you need to make sure you have enough content to sustain them, and then the next season starts. Actually, I think there's similar behavior when it comes to TV shows. So you end up a show on, let's say, the season on a cliffhanger, and then the new season starts, and a lot of people come back to watch the show and get excited about it. So seasonality is now really big into games. It also allows live games to use some of the systems they already have in the game by resetting them again. So a lot of competitive games have ranked systems where you, let's say you hit like platinum or diamond, the highest tier of ranked. And then when the new season kicks in, you get reset again. So using the same system without necessarily introducing a lot of new content, you're encouraging the players to go back again and enjoy achieving those ranks over again. So seasonal resets are financially reasonable way of you sometimes to reuse some of the systems you have, but also package them with content that can get the players excited about checking out your game again. Then time-limited events are very popular. So if you have something in the game that's going to last for a short duration of time, you can make that experience so different from the rest of the game. You can go a little bit, because the goal of it usually is to break the pace of what you have in the game, make it a bit different, breathe some fresh air into it, and reacquire some of maybe the users you dropped out throughout the season. Having it also being there for a limited time, some players wouldn't want to miss out. They would like to join in, see what's going on. That fear, fear of missing out, is an important factor when it comes to time-limited events. But also, it's really good to break the pace, because you have players that are really engaged in your game. They play the whole season. Having some sort of events within the season that just change how the game is played will most likely get them to stick a little bit longer before they go back to their previous behavior of playing the mode they prefer. And usually this gets paired up as well with unique items that you can only obtain in that season, or sometimes it's cosmetics, depends on the genre of the game. In shooters, it's usually cosmetics. And the other part here as well is you can also have time-limited content without necessarily having an event that go hand in hand. The idea is having time-limited features in the game in general drives excitement by the players, because they want to be there. They want to be in the moment that it's happened. It's an event they can share and talk to their friends about in the future for the friends that have missed it. I've heard a lot of Destiny players talk about specific arcs when they were happy when they were there when that thing has happened. So the time-limited aspect of features can give some exclusiveness and excitement for your game. So a couple of things just to keep in mind that I might not have covered before. It's very important to remember that there's no replacement for a strong core loop. So I got this image from Destructor of Fun. It's a very cool, actually, blog. If you guys don't know about it, would be interesting to see it. But one thing that they really mention here is tied in with the thing that I mentioned before. Retention is a big word. And for you to understand when to utilize which engagement system or which design, you need to understand what sort of retention you're tackling. If the players are dropping in day 1 or day 3 of the game, then I don't think that your problem in the game is that you don't have an end game or a very cool end season. I think the problem is in your core experience, in your first time user experience. That's where you should optimize. That's where you should look at what's going on, spend more of your resources there. If a lot of players are dropping around day 7 instead of the end game, then what's happening around there? Are they dropping at a specific rank? Is your XP curve too grindy? Are your missions distracting the players from the experience? Are you introducing a lot of features too early? Are you introducing some features too late? But then at the end of the day, what keeps the game intact is a strong core loop. Like some games have been live, well, in the past at least, they managed to stay live with a key audience without a lot of engagement systems because their core loop is very strong. And then they build the engagement systems in a way to incorporate deeply in it. So that's something that I wanted to call out. Second thing is, it's very, very important to remember if you're in a live service game, you're never in a bubble. So there's always things happening in other games. So especially with your competitors, you need to keep an eye on what they're doing, when they're releasing their things, and then decide, are you going to release at the same time as them? Because there's a good chance there is a lot of your player base are playing those other games as well. We're seeing more and more that players don't necessarily play one game in the genre. They actually play multiple games in the same genre because a lot of the games are now free to play as well, as I mentioned. So you're also thinking about if you're releasing an event or releasing some content, you need to utilize it at the right time where it has good space in the competitive sphere. And then the second thing, you need to keep an eye on real world events as well. So if your content that you release or the season you create is at the right time, it matches with something that the people are thinking about or going through at the same time, that would be will most probably result in it being more successful and useful for you. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is social. I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking like, oh, how come this person has been talking a lot about retention and he did not bring up social? So it's now almost a fact that social is a key retention tool for games. If you manage to make a game a positive social experience, players like to play it with their friends, they have met friends in it, they're more likely to stay in it. This is something that like for a while it's been studied, been researched, and I think now I feel we got to the conclusion that yes, like a game, if it's more social, it will most probably show better retention. It is a very, very big topic. Social gaming is not easy to cover, and usually games don't necessarily put it off properly. A lot of games end up thinking about very complicated social systems to make social gaming work. So they start adding clan-based systems, or they start adding some weird social progressions and currencies, which do work, but usually the core of social gaming is in the game itself. It's what the players do together on the minute to minute. It's how you help them forge bonds in the game, how you help them achieve unified goals, how you make the joining on friends and playing with friends an easy experience, or even meeting friends in the game. And then you can design the more detailed social and engagement features around it. So I didn't dive too much deeper into social because it will, again, it could like blow up and take a big section. I thought progression and key retain triggers, seasonality are more important, but also I needed to mention that it's a very, very, very strong tool that sometimes could even replace very strong engagement systems for the short time. Eventually, you will need to have proper strong engagement systems, but social can help retention for sure. And then the last bit is narrative. There's more and more games that are using narrative cliffhangers and teasing at the end of the season of what's going to happen in the next season. So narrative is a strong tool for sure. Sometimes, as I mentioned, narrative designers are part of the engagement team, sometimes are not. My specialty is not really in narrative design, but I've worked with very, very talented narrative designers, and I can see it's a very, very strong tool to make some engagement systems instead of being outworldy and just like numbers popping around the screen, into grounding them into the core experience of the game and getting the players excited about them because they understand what they're achieving a bit more. So you can use narrative as a strong tool to ground your engagement systems and make them interesting for the players. So in summary, live service games are here to stay. I know there's a lot of discussion around how successful they are, how big they are. You look at the numbers, they have the highest number of players, they have record revenues, and they're growing further and further. There's still a lot of space for improvements and learnings for the gaming industry in this area. There's so much we can still do in live service games. The second thing is engagement design is a lot like other areas of game design. I don't feel like there's a reason for us to shy away from it instead of just tackling it head on and then try to incorporate it deeper into the core loop instead of tacking it onto the experience. We need to always think of the player motivations when you're designing them. Do they want to grow their skill? Do they want to feel like a power fantasy? Do they want to have more multiple options when they play? And what are the things that gets your players happy when they're playing the game, and design your engagement systems around them. And then even if you're not working on a live service games, having very good progression and engagement systems in your game will result in higher completion rates. I think one of my favorite examples is Insomniac's Spider-Man. I think the completion rate for that game is around like 54%, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, you can check it. But it has higher completion rates than a lot of games. And I think it's because they have a very, very cool engagement design systems in that game. It's very incorporated in the core loop. It was really fun to play that game. It was one of the few games that I actually was so excited that I went and 100%ed it. It's a very, very solid game that is not a live service game, but incorporated a lot of engagement design concepts in its design. And then the three key pillars, the focus areas for live game ops are acquisition, retention, and investment / monetization. So if you end up finding yourself on a live service game, if you're the person who's directing, working on the product, make sure you have a clear strategy for those three. Make sure that you have a clear understanding of the goals you want to achieve for each and how you want to get them. If you are part of a team, then it would be really useful for you to understand that the strategy from the team leadership in terms of these three areas, and then you can incorporate your designs and what you're building to answer for that strategy and make sure that it gets achieved. And I think with that, we are done. I can hand this back to Ashraf and get some Q&A, and thank you so much for listening.
Cool, amazing. Thank you so much, Feras. Honestly, I had so many questions answered here and so many more that have like popped up. So I will open the floor to questions now. If anyone has anything, you can raise your hands if you would like to ask the question by talking, or you can write them out. Also, I don't know if you saw the chat while you were giving the talk, but basically, people really like to discuss things as things go on. So there were questions that passed by. If you're okay with this, I will ask them.
Yeah, let's do that.
So for the power progression part, Ahmad's asking, is it considered vertical progression? Because it's alongside any progress through the main theme of said game.
Yes, so actually, I think another name for it is vertical progression. So I think you can easily call it that, and people would understand it. I think maybe it would have been even better. So I think maybe the next time I do the talk, I'll name it vertical progression, because right after that, I say horizontal progression. So you're right, Ahmed. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for this. Yara says cliffhangers suck, but they're also genius, and I think we can agree with this.
Definitely. Yeah. I think this is why I like binge watching shows these days instead of watching them as they come out, because yeah, some cliffhangers are really, really bad.
It's absolutely, sorry about this phone call yet again. I did want to ask how much of this can actually be used in things other than games as well? So not exclusively just games, you know, like thinking of the retention rate, thinking of you know, the way to get to the users, all that stuff.
Yeah, so that's actually it's very interesting, because I think it was a couple of months ago I did a similar talk to a company, and it was more about gamification. So actually a lot of apps these days are using those mechanics. I used Duolingo as an example. It's in my opinion is one of the best sorry, I just read that chat. Duolingo is very good when it comes to using gamification. Actually, they I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but they actually saw some positive retention in the app. I don't know if people also use Musician. It's an app to teach players how to play guitar. I have a bunch of my friends that actually are using it. So that day I was seeing it, and they have a lot of gamification systems in there. I think the term acquisition, retention, and even investment is used by app developers. So if you sit with product managers working apps, they're using a similar terminology. So I guess the TLDR is, yes, you can use a lot of these concepts, but I actually feel that the gaming industry is ahead when it comes to tech. I think tech looks at the gaming industry to learn these concepts a bit more, which is kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, the number of things that games are, let's say, ahead of other industries and is pretty cool. Like, people using Unreal Engine for to try to get what's it called? Simulations of things, just as an example. It's been interesting to see. Okay, so Ahmed raised his hand, so I'm just gonna give him the chance to unmute and ask the questions, if that's good with you.
Yeah, let's do that.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you, and thanks a lot for being here and helping all of us. I've asked a question in the chat, but I'm gonna read it out, and then I have another question afterwards. Can we get like a further explanation on what is pay to enter games? Is it kind of something like Final Fantasy 14, where you can download the game, play like the first part of the game, like the prologue of the game, but then to continue further, do you have to pay money? Is that what it means?
Yes, that's one example of it. I think even like World of Warcraft did the same. You play up to a specific rank and then you have to pay. That's one of the examples. I think some other games do it. I think some fighting games did it when they give you a limited number of characters. So you can play the game for free with 2 characters, but then if you want to get the rest. Some people even call the free-to-enter model the shareware model, because I don't know, I think around the late 2000s, that was very popular on the internet. I used Call of Duty as an example of free to enter, but it's a bit of a debatable topic, right? Because their Warzone experience is integrated in terms of progression and social with their premium experiences. So if you want to play Modern Warfare, you have to pay $60, but you can play Warzone for free, right? But the argument would be that, well, Warzone is its own experience. So is it really free to enter or free to play? But that's an example where you're running into free to enter being very similar to free to play. But yes, definitely Final Fantasy 14 is an example of pay to enter if they're doing such a mechanic. There's also weekend trials there. You could consider them that, but because of the duration of them being so short, I wouldn't necessarily call them free to enter. I just call them weekend trials or free trials, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And are you familiar with Destiny 2?
I've played it multiple times, but
like
I haven't
the
played it
system
in
the
last
game.
year. Yeah.
The system in game where all the new content and all the end game content is locked behind a subscription. What would that model be considered, and what would that model like? What do you think about that model?
So I would put it very closely to the DLC model. Like you basically, I think if I remember Destiny 2, the game now is free to play, and then I thought you purchased the DLCs, but they're also incorporated in the store directly, if I remember. But now you're also saying there's a subscription base. So I think this model is actually really good in terms of you getting a lot of players into the game by removing the friction and the barrier at entry, right? Like if Destiny had that full price at the entrance, most probably you wouldn't have seen so many players engage in the future DLCs and the future paid content. Plus, I think because the game has been alive for a while, that most probably all the amount of copies they would have sold, they have sold already. So switching to free to enter or the free to play plus DLC or subscription mechanic makes a lot of sense. I'm sure it's one of the key reasons Destiny is successful. Now you see some games actually work around that in a way, so they don't necessarily call themselves free to play, but they release on a subscription platform at launch. So Back 4 Blood's a good example. Like they came out, they were on Game Pass. So technically they're free to play, but really they're not. They were selling like copies on other platforms, or you can actually purchase the game outside of the Game Pass. But they utilize the number of players that come with the Game Pass, and then later on they release DLCs. The players purchase the DLCs, and I think the last time I read about the studio, they recouped their investment, they made the profits, and now they're moving on to the next game. So it's a very viable model, I guess, is the TLDR.
Okay, thanks a lot. I have one more question that I've asked a lot of the instructors here. What would you recommend to somebody that's trying to start out as a game designer, or also in this case, since you mention it, someone that also wants to maybe have a chance at engagement design? What would that be?
So that's very interesting because I feel what I did was I got a bit lucky with how things work out. So usually what I tell people is like, don't do what I tried to do, because I actually left like the industry entirely and came back. So one thing that I'm noticing is a couple of things. Like, let's say if I'm looking at CVs or cover letters for people that are like joining, and I'm like reviewing who I'm going to interview, I think if you don't have a lot of experience, I find, for me personally, this is just anecdotal, a strong cover letter that shows the things you're interested in doing and where you want to be at is usually useful. Gets you a bit eye-catchy. If someone that doesn't have work experience, but they've done things, it shows also they're already invested in this thing. Like, when you think about it from the other person's perspective, you're applying for a job. That person, you don't know how many CVs they're looking at. Usually the CVs that stand out are the people that have shown in a way their passion towards what they want to do. So if I see someone that, for example, has I think one of the designers we ended up hiring was, on paper, they didn't look really great in terms of experience, but they had a website where they covered multiple like articles about engagement design. So when I read what they wrote, I was like, okay, let's interview this person. And when we interviewed them, they turned out actually to be really solid. Like, I was able to tell that they were the person that wrote these articles. We ended up hiring them over someone that had experience in a like established, well-known companies. So
Mhm.
maybe I segued a bit, but those are like multiple ways. Just find ways to stand out, show out your passion, even if you don't have like professional work experience. Having some sort of other things on the side to help the people that might make the decision to hire you or get you as an intern, whatever, will be really useful. At least I found that working for me when I'm surveying CVs.
Can you just I'm sorry I'm taking so much of your time.
Sure.
What you mentioned a strong resume. What makes a resume strong, to be more elaborative on that?
So basically on paper, what could make it more interesting is how much of a fit they are for the role. Like, let's say we're talking about someone who has already work experience, and let's say I'm hiring for an engagement designer. If someone has catered their CV to look like they have experience in engagement design, or they shown interest in it somehow in their CV, that would make that CV stronger. If they worked on ship titles that I can play, or ship titles that people know about, or they're strong in that field, that makes their CV a bit stronger. If they've done a lot of personal development, or they've been able to showcase in their CV that they have drive, which usually is either via, like, as I mentioned, that person had a link to their website that we can see what they've done, had some personal projects, they were volunteering in a, let's say, something like this. All of this stuff makes people stand out a bit. If that
Mm.
does that answer your question?
Yeah, and
Okay, cool.
that pretty much hits the nail. Thank you a lot, and thanks again.
No, thank you so much.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Ahmed, for these questions. We have, I think, one or two more questions so far.
Sure.
This one's by Yara. She said she has a small question. How can you tell if a certain event or change will be good and players will enjoy it? She's often online and sees a lot of discontent for certain events in some of these games.
Yeah, so I usually like to say is you never really know until it's out, right? But that's obviously not enough, because you have to try to make sure that you have something is good or not. I guess specifically when it comes to, I think the question is about events, no, but also change. Cool. So first thing is data. Like, as I mentioned, if the game is already live, you have enough data, you come with a hypothesis, you talk with your analyst or the other designers, and then you come up with a solution. The best thing you can do is some internal tests before it goes out live. If you do like an internal playtest, we do even some things that's called Ninja, like anonymous tests, so you can check multiple developers on the side so they don't influence each other. If your company is big enough, you can do focused group testing, where you get a sample of the player base, show them the change, but the change is not out there. That's one way to check it. Benchmarking, I think, is one of the cheapest tools that a lot of game developers also underutilize. So there's no ideas that come from nowhere. All of us are building upon the previous, like we're standing on the shoulders of the giants before us when we're building games. So if you have something in another game that you can benchmark and say, this was very, very successful, but would be way better if I changed it in this way or that way, that also helps, having some benchmark. It also helps you sell ideas internally. So if I go to, let's say, my managers, and I say, like, I want this amount of money to create this event, and I tell them, trust me on this, this is something no one has ever seen. It's going to take them a lot of convincing to trust me, versus if I have a bunch of benchmarks of how similar events have been successful and why this is different and why it should exist. But yeah, unfortunately, you never know. Like, sometimes you have your very strong gut feeling, sometimes you feel really happy, sometimes internally something has been going great, it tested really well, and it goes live and it blows up in your face. I think you just take it as it is. It's the most important thing is to don't get like, stay in touch with your player base. If the players are actually upset, the data is also showing they're really upset, then take that as a learning and move on. It's very, very, very rare, unless you've done something exceptional, that you do one change that kills the whole game. But so it's an iterative process. It's not as scary as it seems. I hope that answers it. It's a very big question, but I hope this answers it.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, awesome. Okay, mini break question. What's your favorite color?
I think this is a tricky one, because I always say purple, but I own nothing. I don't wear any purple clothes. I don't have anything that's purple in my life. So I think this is an awakening. I need to buy some purple stuff after this talk. So, or change my favorite color, but I'm gonna go with purple.
We have like a mini war in our sessions when people ask what their favorite color is, and then the purple squad is happy at the moment.
Oh yeah, nice. I can see. It's definitely the correct answer then.
And okay, so I think this is the final question. It's by Rafiq, and it is, can you explain the horizontal progression a bit more? Like, would Splatoon have horizontal progression?
I'm trying to remember Splatoon. I think I played it at launch. I can't talk specifically to Splatoon, no, because I don't remember the systems for it, but I can talk a bit more about horizontal progression. I think, like, let's design one right now. Let's say we're playing Street Fighter. Street Fighter has 18 characters, and when you start the game, you're level 1 and you have access only to 5. And the more you play, you level up, you unlock more characters, right? Horizontal progression would be basically saying that the character you unlock at rank 10 is equally viable to the characters you have at rank 0. Because like, Street Fighter as a whole would most probably fail as a game if that character that's ranked 20 is the best character ever, then everyone's going to play that character. And then the other part is you want to make sure that the ranked 1 players have a fair chance when they fight someone who's ranked 20. So that's a simple way of explaining it. I think if you can consider some cosmetic power curves to be horizontal progression as well. So you're unlocking cosmetic variety, but you're not impacting gameplay. But I think let's stick to the Street Fighter example. That's the simplest one. I think it explains horizontal progression.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, and then there's one more question from Alpha, which is, how can we apply the concept of retention on a platformer? So I guess, yeah, all yours.
I guess it depends on the type of platformers. There are multiple, but let's take something like really simple. So if we consider an endless, no, it's not necessarily about rewards only. Let's take like an endless runner as an example, like, I don't know, Temple Run or something like that. Yeah, let's consider that a platformer for the example. If you have basically, as I mentioned, you need to create goals for the players, ways to measure them, and then the rewards come. So the rewards by themselves aren't the reason that your players are returning. So let's say in this platform or endless runner, we do have levels. Like, again, I'm designing on the fly. I'm sure I'll have better ideas if we're looking at the game itself. But yeah, you add some sort of progression system. So you make sure there's enough rewards to give the players some extra XP as they're going. So from rank 1 to rank 2, they need X amount of XP, and they get the XP by playing. And then you provide like rewards on each of those ranks. And then you can also add some sort of quest or mission system if that fits into the game. Or going back to some of the examples I mentioned today, some key return triggers, right? If your core loop is really good, the players love jumping into your game and playing that platformer or endless runner. But then you add an additional layer of like, well, if you come back tomorrow, there's something new for you. Maybe you rotate different maps, maybe you rotate missions. So I feel like there's a lot of concept you can apply for some sort of endless runner or even a platformer. I feel like maybe a Metroidvania game. I've seen some games have, but that's not Metroidvania actually. If you look at Spelunky, for example, they had those daily runs and a leaderboard system. So if you jump into the game and try to survive for X amount of times in Spelunky, then you get a ranking on a leaderboard, and you get only like 2 tries per day, and you get placement in that leaderboard for that day. And then the next day you launch Spelunky, you get to give it another go and place higher on the leaderboard. So as an example, it's kind of a platformer, but it's more of a roguelike platformer. So again, really depends on the game, but I'm sure there's multiple systems you can use.
All right, awesome. So yeah, basically, good luck.
Yeah. Well, retention is tricky, it's challenging, but I think, like as I mentioned, benchmarking is such a good tool. Like if you believe you're really strong in one area, and let's say your designer aren't really strong in other areas, there's no shame into look into some games that you believe are really good in that area, benchmark them. Don't take the ideas necessarily as they are, but just adapt them deeper into your game is one way to get around these things. There's a lot of resources out there for also retention and retention systems. There's so much to read out there as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like from what I understood from your talk as well, like when it comes to retention in single player games, it's all about making sure that the players are engaged at certain points. So basically, if you want people to actually keep on playing, you have to give them the juicy rewards that they want to get when they get certain points in the game, or else they won't ever finish it. So
I think that's a big element. Yeah, it's again like giving the player that constant reward, constant goals, measurement of the goals, shifting how the game goes. A lot of players leave out of the game because they believe they've seen everything in it. A lot of games become a bit stale and repetitive. So all of these things can help for sure. I wonder if you or me have crashed. Nice, Ashraf is frozen. Cool. I can't do much since he's the moderator. I can awkwardly stare into the camera until he's back, I guess. Nice, Ashraf is frozen. Okay, he's back.
internet has been wacky.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that we're good on questions. Feras, thank you so much for today. It was a pleasure to have you. This topic was a bit, I would say, advanced for what we usually give at the Gaming Academy, but I really wanted to learn about it. And when you offered to give it, I was like, yes, definitely. So, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone here also does. And yeah, I'll keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for having me. I had a blast. And yeah, good luck with this thing, Ashraf. It's really amazing. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone.
All right, take care, you guys. We'll see you soon.